Hello, and welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In going with our theme of the month, which is meaningful assessment, what I'm going to be talking about today is using your students as teachers. The idea of using students as teachers comes from the fact that our students come to us with a lot of learning already underneath their belt. So when we are doing a lesson, we can't assume they don't know anything about what we're teaching them. They may know a lot about what they're teaching, and in fact, they may know more than we know about what we're teaching. Because there are certain things that kids are passionate about and they learn about, and they've spent a lot of time studying and researching and learning about. And so for us to discount this past learning of theirs and to just assume they don't know that and to teach them the basics is a waste of their time. It's a waste of your time, and students aren't going to get much out of it. So one thing that you can do is to use your students as the teachers. I had this student named John who forgotten more about space than I ever cared to know about it. It was his passion. He studied astronomy. He read every book he could get his hands on. And so when we got to my unit on space that I was supposed to teach, which very basic concepts, it was a 5th grade class, he already understood these concepts really well. And I could tell this just from my conversations with him. So rather than make John go through the lesson along with everyone else, because there was information in there for other students to learn, what I did was I asked John to teach the class. So what this looked like was I gave John kind of a lesson plan, an outline of a lesson plan, so just a blank lesson plan, and I asked him to come up with what his lesson would look like. And use what he has learned from others in the past about teaching to teach this particular lesson. So what John did was he, took his vast knowledge of space and was able to insert it into this lesson plan. And eventually he created a very good lesson on space that he taught to the class with great success. The students really enjoyed having someone else in front of the class for a little while. John enjoyed, teaching what he knew and showing off his expertise to the class. And I then had created an expert within my classroom. Rather than, trying to be the expert myself. Because as teachers, as much as we try, we can't always be the experts. There's just too much stuff that we need to cover. Even high school teachers with their focused content can't be experts on everything. So there are other ways to use students as teachers as well. For instance, what I would often do was if I had to cover a lot of ground, because in today's day and age of content standards, we have to cover a lot of content standards, and we're covering them at a mile wide and an inch in depth. So we're not going into much detail. And so as a result, we have to kind of gloss over certain things. So by using students as teachers, though, I can cover a lot of material, and kids become experts in one area and then teach others about their area. So for instance, when I was teaching the Middle Ages, I broke up the Middle Ages into 5 different time periods during the Middle Ages. And then I divided the class into 5 groups, and I asked for them to teach, for each group to teach a different aspect of the Middle Ages. So what would happen is, and they could teach it in any way they wanted to. They could teach it in a PowerPoint. They could teach it in they could create a video. They could have a game. They had lots of choices as to what it is that they were going to use that for. And so what happened was students then researched on their own and learned on their own about these particular topics, and they became experts on their topics. Because the great thing about having them teach the lesson is they have to truly understand it in order to be able to teach it, which gives us a greater depth of understanding and much more endurance for learning that content, keeping that content for a long period of time. And so the students, one of the requirements was also the students had to create an assessment of some sort to show what others had learned from their lesson. And the interesting thing about using students as teachers is it does a few things. So one of the things using students as the teacher does is, as I've stated before, is you can cover more content by dividing up the content and having different groups cover different ground. And so in my Middle Ages lesson, one group would start with the beginning of the Middle Ages, and they would teach their lesson, and then the next day we would teach the lesson on, what came after that, and so on and so forth. So students saw a clear progression of how the Middle Ages worked and how it all fit together. It was kind of like a jigsaw. You're taking all these pieces and putting them together into one collective whole. So you can cover a lot of ground as one advantage. Another advantage is, as stated before as well, is that in order for them to be able to teach the lesson, they have to truly be able to understand it. And so what you can get a better job, we can do a better job of, is making sure that kids get an enduring understanding of what it is they're learning. Because in order to teach it, they have to be able to truly understand it. And this graphic actually kind of shows the learning pyramid. And so when we lecture to students or read to students, they're retaining about 10% of what it is that we are teaching them. When you're asking them to teach others, they're retaining 90% of what it is that they have learned. And so who wouldn't want results like that? Who wouldn't want students to, remember or recall or understand 90% of what it is that they learn? A third advantage of using the students as teachers is it brings their expertise that you may not possess. So I talked about John previously, who had an expertise in space, and he shared that with others. Your students have all sorts of expertise that you would like to tap into and have them then show this to others, what they know. And not only that, but they have skills, expertise in skills. So you may have a student that's really good at technology that creates a really amazing presentation that you could not have created otherwise. And so you're tapping into the expertise in the skills of your students, which is always a good thing to do. One of the most important things is empower students to be learners. They have to learn about it before they can teach others. And so it really empowers them as the learner to control their learning and what that learning is going to look like and what method they're going to use to go about learning that. By giving them those choices, they're really getting an understanding of how truly to learn on their own, rather than the teacher, doing the learning for them or giving them the learning. The last advantage of why you should let students teach the class is it creates an amount of empathy. In other words, students assume that teaching is really easy. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they assume it's really easy. And by having them have to teach the class or come up with a lesson or create an assessment, they understand what goes into this and how it's more difficult than they believed. And so this is really important because then they have a greater appreciation for you. They understand that your job is not as easy as they may think. And it gives them a whole new appreciation for your class and what you're doing as a teacher. The ultimate question to ask then is, what makes this a meaningful assessment? What makes the students as teachers meaningful? Well, the fact that they will remember it years from after the fact. So when I have students come back and they tell me, they come back and they say, Mr. Stanley, I remember your class. Never do they say, I remember this test we took, or I remember this article that we read, or I remember this lecture that you gave. They always remember things such as letting them teach the class, because it made them a part of the learning. It empowered them to be learners, and it also gave them space in order to make mistakes and learn how they learned. So in essence, I was teaching kids not only the content, but I was teaching them how they best learn and how they can help others to learn. And so this is going to be much more meaningful for them. It's going to really stick out for them. And so the content that you're covering is going to be, it's going to be so much better remembered because of they're linking it to this fact that you gave them some skin in the game. You made them part of the process. You made them, just as important a part of the classroom as you are. And so that can be very powerful for students, so that's what makes it meaningful.